soils is something that's very dear to my heart. I think it is an element of both our farming policy and our environment policy that's been overlooked probably in recent decades, and I want to see it front and centre of our future policy. And my perspective on this really is as a farmer. My family have farmed in Cornwall for 6 generations. I worked on the farm for 10 years, and there were lots of important principles about soil husbandry that were literally passed down the generations. And even on our land, individual fields, my father would pass on advice that his grandfather and great-grandfather had passed down the generations about how to manage an individual field. So for me, soil is not just about science. There's a kind of art to it as well, and the approach that you have to take to soil management needs to change depending on what part of the country you're in, the type of soils you've got, the topography of your land. The second thing is, as a minister, you often get stuck reading your ministerial box every night with lots of submissions put up to you and decisions you have to make. But in summer recess, I get time to just read books, which is really nice and a pleasure. And one of the books I read last summer was a book called An Agricultural Testament, a very old book from the 1930s by Sir Albert Howard, who's seen by many as one of the fathers of the organics movement. But the fascinating thing is, when you read his book, he didn't see himself as some kind of niche organic farmer. Far from it, he was first and foremost an agronomist. And what he was really advancing was an alternative science, an alternative approach to agronomy, which he believed would be better than some of the prevailing ideas at the time. And I think the reason it's interesting is a number of things. We have a tendency to think that modern agriculture, as it's called, started in the 1970s, and that before that everything was fine. It's very clear, reading Albert Howard's book from the 1930s, that there was concern around soil erosion, alkaline soils that had been abandoned in places like the US, concern about the use of pesticides and chemical fertilizers as well. And what he had argued is that the soil should not be mined, it had to be farmed, and that you had to pay attention to the cycle of life. He tried to replicate the conditions that you'll get in a natural forest, the breakdown of the soil, the development of humus. And what he recognized is that soil is not just about chemistry, it's about biology as well. And if you get your management of it right, and you take care to get humus in the soil, a wonderful old-fashioned word, humus. These days scientists say organic matter or even OM, but humus denotes that it's a living thing, the soil, that we have to take care of. It's not just the chemistry, it's the mycorrhizal bacteria and fungi that can help a plant make best use of the nutrients available to it. So it was a fascinating book which informed a lot of my thinking. The final thing I want to say is how that connects to what we're doing now. We have been clear in our future agriculture policy that we want to move away from an arbitrary system of direct payments just for the amount of land that you happen to own or rent, and instead move to a system of payment by results, payment for the delivery of public goods, principally environmental public goods, but also other goods such as animal welfare outcomes as well. And when it comes to soil, we've also said that we see a central plank of this future policy being around soil. And there's a number of reasons why I think that's important. As some of the speakers have pointed out, there is a connection between the way we manage our soils and the way we care for our soils and air quality, and the way we care for our soils and water quality. And as was pointed out earlier, if we get this right, we can store more carbon in our soils to help mitigate the climate change that we all face as a challenge. So there is a lot that we can achieve with soil. There's a second reason why I think soil is so important. Often I find, as I go around, a tension between environmental NGOs on the one side and farmers on the other. And if we talk about the environment, farmers will say you don't care about food production. And if I talk about food production, NGOs say, oh well, what are you going to do to our environment? And I think we need to try to dismantle that antagonism, because I think it's a false antagonism. And what I'm seeking to achieve is maybe a fusion of some of the traditional approaches to farm husbandry and soil husbandry, the type of thing that my great-grandfather might have done, with some of the best science and technology available to us today, so that we have genuinely sustainable farming that makes use of some of those old approaches to farm husbandry, but in a way that doesn't compromise our productivity or our food production. And I think we can do this. And the one thing that I always recognise is when I talk about the importance of soil health and the way we care for our soils, everyone agrees. So the green NGOs agree, and farmers agree, because all farmers understand and value their soils. So I'm very interested in how we can develop this approach, what types of interventions we should have, incentives we're going to be using, redeploying that budget of £3 billion a year away from direct payments to the delivery of public goods. And I don't want that to be just about creating habitats or taking farmland out of production. Crucially, if we want to produce food, we should be using that money to change the approach to soil husbandry in particular, and farm husbandry in general. We've got a great opportunity to do that. And I just wanted to congratulate again Rebecca for all the hard work she's done on this. It's great to have her as my PPS in Defra. She's been a champion for soil health and soils and sustainable management of our soils all the time as an MP, so there's nobody better to have with me in Defra as we address these issues at the moment, and I think it's great that you put together such a comprehensive panel of speakers. I look forward to getting a further report on what comes out of that later. I'm afraid I've got to go off and do other meetings, other interviews now, but I very much look forward to being updated on this later on. But thank you very much again for inviting me, and very much.